I created a community for ticket resellers. Hi, I'm AP The Plug, a successful ticket reseller. I've helped several people start their own online ticket business. Now I'm offering you access to our exclusive membership program, complete with resources, tools, and coaching to help you succeed. With our program, you can earn extra income, enjoy a flexible schedule, and follow proven strategies to succeed. Don't wait. Click the link below to get started today and transform your financial future.
Diddy was arrested in New York by federal authorities. He is still currently behind bars facing charges on trafficking, sexual assault, and a litany of other charges. In your expert opinion, what do you think about that situation, and what do you think the end result is going to turn out to be when it comes to Sean Combs as we stand right now?
Well, let's say this. Let's separate what's going on from Mr. Combs, P. Diddy. You've all heard of Miranda rights. You have a right to remain silent, anything you say, etc., etc. Miranda was not a nice guy, but these rights that everybody has a vested interest in protecting were enumerated and articulated through Miranda. Now, what I'm talking about is separate and apart from P. Diddy. Over the last 50 years, I've done a lot of trial work. I was a criminal defense lawyer, and starting more than 40-some years ago, I started getting clients who had federal cases, and we'd have to go to trial with the feds. I represented a lot of pimps and prostitutes 40-some years ago. And there's West Memphis, Arkansas, really close to Memphis, Tennessee, right across the bridge. And down here in Mississippi, there's what's been glamorized as P Valley in the series. And I would have pimps transporting dancers and prostitutes across the state lines. So we'd get not RICO, but Mann Act charges against them. The Mann Act was designed to catch Jack Johnson, a black heavyweight champion of the world before World War I that could not be defeated by any great white hope. Jack Johnson had a white wife, and she had some friend girls that would travel around with her, and particularly in the South, a lot of white people found that very offensive. So they set up the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, to develop a proposed law that became known as the Mann Act, and that was designed to get Jack Johnson. Now understand, this was this man's lawful wife, but he was riding on a train across a corner of Georgia, let's say, on the way to a seaport and on the way to Europe. And because they weren't armed at the time, the FBI was accompanied by local law enforcement officers. And in Georgia, let's just say that 100 some years ago, they did not recognize interracial marriage. So Jack Johnson was arrested for transporting a woman, his wife, across interstate lines for illicit purposes. So there is no money necessity involved in this, but it is known as the Mann Act. I'm looking at the 14-page indictment right now, and it doesn't say Mann Act anywhere in there, where usually it would. It mentions the federal code section. I'm looking at the rest of the 14 pages, and I find it absolutely extraordinary because there are only 3 counts to this indictment. And ordinarily, in my experience, an indictment like this would read, between the dates of 2009 up until the return of the indictment, the defendant did unlawfully transport females across state lines for illicit purposes, and they leave it at that. you would be guessing what they were talking about. You'd have to file motions to get a more particular statement, and the feds would fight like hell to keep you from finding out the details so they could try you by ambush. For these 3 counts in the indictment, they went over and over a lot of things. Like, for example, each particular phase of this thing, they keep repeating all of the defendant's aliases. Their standard procedure is in the very first paragraph. The defendant, in this case, and they list his aliases, hereinafter known as the defendant, referred to as the defendant, and they would just say defendant in each count where that was necessary instead of repeating all of this. 2,000 bottles of lubricant oil. What in the devil is that? That has no business in the indictment. You have other things in here. The IV, where the performers were given IV infusions to keep their energy up, I guess, because these things have gone on so long. Now, let's translate what they're talking about. They're talking about an accusation that they never did say, but it's inferred that Diddy was pimping an orgy that lasted a while, and he did this on a routine basis, and there were guests that they referred to in the indictment as numerous witnesses, and these guests were coming to a mansion where there were various sex acts going on in various parts of the mansion for purposes of inspiration. And the guests could join in or be inspired by what they were seeing. They even mentioned in here, which was just the scandalous superfluous in this indictment, that Diddy was masturbating during the course of some of these proceedings, which would that's surplus language. That's just trying to inflame. They referred to this thing where we saw on video him running out of the hotel room with a towel without giving any of the background behind it and assaulting this woman. And they referred to it, and that's for inflammatory purposes because that's just part of the pimp game. By the way, anybody's talking about, yeah, man, I'm pimping, man, you know. That's what it's about. It's a filthy game. I represented enough pimps to know what the game is. Been a long time ago, but it's been the same since time immemorial. They do call prostitution the world's second oldest profession, and whatever the first oldest one was, whoever was doing whatever that was to earn the money to pay for the services of the second oldest profession. So it's been going on for a long time. It's nothing new. And what I'm picking up on is that Diddy is being alleged to have conducted these sex shows, and he invited guests who had the use of his mansions to be involved in an orgy as they saw fit. He also is alleged to have recorded this, and that's where we get to what we're looking at. Somebody important is being or was recorded on these devices, and somebody is being protected. Now, I noticed that Diddy, through his lawyer, has been in continuous contact with the feds for quite a few months. Back in March, he surrendered his passport. He returned to New York, where he did not live, and secured a residence so he could participate in the defense of the case, which is all that's required. He was supposed to have been apprised of when the indictment would be unsealed, and he would be required to report with his lawyer and surrender himself after making bond arrangements. And there was supposed to have been a discussion on how much the feds were going to recommend the bond be set at. They ambushed him and arrested him in a shopping center. with some of his kinfolk, and now they want him kept incognito. Not incognito, incommunicado, so he cannot talk to anyone. That's what the feds have been doing, and most recently involving these mortgage fraud situations, so that parties who could blow the whistle on other parties were not able to communicate with anyone, even their lawyers, but say once a week, so they could not tell what they knew. And that's what we have here. It is unusual for Homeland Security to be involved in these things, and there are some references in here that the offenses had an international impact, which brings in Homeland Security instead of leaving this up to the FBI, which is for domestic matters, ordinarily of this type of thing. And remember, the FBI was set up to go get Jack Johnson so they could set up and prosecute under what became the Mann Act. So this is the FBI's bailiwick. They were only present during the service of the search warrants. They weren't the primary parties. What that indicates to me, in my experience, is that somebody in the FBI was not deemed trustworthy and might give confidential information to somebody outside, which they didn't want, so they brought in Homeland Security. This is not ordinarily the type of thing that Homeland Security deals with. So you'll notice, too, that 2 of his mansions were searched. One was in California, fine. One was in Florida. The peculiar thing about the one in Florida is that on the same lot, Diddy had a second mansion, which was not searched. And what they seem to have gotten is a lot of recordings that they confiscated. Now, you might say that's evidence in the case, but the point of the exercise is that even though quite a few people are mentioned indirectly, only one person got indicted. In the federal practice is usually when you have months to investigate something, they indict everybody and they mention everybody, even if they are listed as an unindicted co-actor. They did not do that in this case, which is indicative of them trying to hide somebody's identity and protect some people. The other point is from what you can determine, most of this happened in Florida or California. Why no indictments returned there? And why did they pick New York? What they seem to have done is, considering the totality of the circumstances and the U.S. attorney involved, is they picked New York because it was particularly hostile to Donald Trump and particularly favorable to protecting anybody who is against Trump. So we're kind of put on clue as to who the rest of these unmentioned witnesses, meaning attendees at these events, happen to be. The other point I find interesting is they made a big to-do during the bond review situation that they had yesterday with the fact that he had 3 disassembled carbines and some loaded magazines. Now, everybody and his mama has stuff like that in Florida since it's a constitutional carry and gun-friendly state. In New York, there are a bunch of little freaks who get, oh my God, he's got a gun. And even though there were some federal crimes involved with altered serial numbers on the 3 receiver groups, which is against the law, I think they picked New York so they could use the fact that he had 3 weapons, which, hell, everybody on my block has got 10 times more than that, as something condemning and touching on or giving semblance to some justification. justification for not setting a bond or even allowing a bond. Now, they're going to go in front of a federal court today, I imagine. And if not, they'll probably go trot down to D.C., which is not that far from New York, and seek one of the appellate judges on the Second Circuit Court of Appeals to set a bond. They can pick anyone they want. The government can come back and demand a bigger hearing, and they'd probably have a 3-member panel that would be selected at random. But in any event, something stinks to high heavens with this whole case. Now, with that said, I'll pass the mic.
Yeah, no, that's some great information. Over the last few months, people have kind of been leaving little comments and saying little things, like that. The next thing I'll ask you is, what do you see being the outcome of this case? And it looks like Diddy's going to be the fall guy. Do you see him getting bond, and do you see him being convicted?
Well, if they can prove their allegations, remember there are only 3 counts. And basically what they're accusing him of is pimping and procuring. And one count that deals with the after effects of doing what pimps do to ply their business. And an inference that somehow or another this is organized crime, which is not the intent of RICO. By the way, they don't use the word RICO in the indictment, which ordinarily they would. And RICO is 54 years old. It was passed in 1970, and it was to deal with John Gotti type situation, gangsters, drug cartels, and that kind of situations. You see it being used or bastardized in Georgia to go after a teachers group, former president of the United States for engaging in political activity, and for proceeding against a rap group for having some disagreeable lyrics. So it's being corrupted. It's racketeering influenced, organized crime is what the thing stands for. RICO. Racketeering or influenced criminal organizations. And they are pushing it for political purposes. And the last time they did this was about 10, 11 years ago, when they had a series of prosecutions that were initiated on state levels for mortgage fraud, mortgage foreclosure fraud. You got some people who had something that would have contributed evidence-wise in sustaining these allegations of foreclosure fraud. They got locked up and charged peripherally for remotely associated things. And interestingly, what the feds did is they used Homeland Security to get them locked incommunicado so they couldn't communicate with anybody. And particularly, the governor in Maryland got implicated in one of these scams, and his niece, who was a federal prosecutor, busted somebody that could have blown the whistle on him. And that person got held incommunicado. Then there was, of course, the thing with the presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, out on the West Coast with George Soros, who was also hooked up with the Maryland thing, and One West Bank, along with Mnuchin, who was the CEO for that bank, and became part of the Obama administration for a year, the Trump administration for that matter. But people were locked up and held incommunicado, so they could not do anything about that. But there were 5,200 counts of indictments returned against One West Bank. And Mnuchin, that Kamala Harris, when she got elected as Attorney General for California, consolidated dismissed, and then a few weeks later, Soros sold One West Bank for, I think it was $3.42 billion, made a tidy profit off of it. So this is part of a process that got put in place 40 years ago by Eastland from Mississippi, Biden, and Byrd, who had formerly been Grand Dragon for the Klan in the U.S., and they were in the U.S. Senate together, and they added these provisions to U.S. criminal law codes that allowed this kind of persecution for political purposes. So it's nothing new. It's been around for 40-some years. I've defended people who've been caught up in it. That's been a while ago, but it is a bad thing. So this is the same thing that went after R. Kelly about in a couple of his series of cases. His circumstances are somewhat different because that involved underage children. But as I'm reading this indictment, and as I'm talking to you, I'm going back over it again. I don't see any references to underage children in this indictment.
Right.
So, any questions or comments so far?
Yes, sir. And we highlighted some of those exact points yesterday as well, as far as there's no underage. It didn't seem like in the indictment there were any underage involvement, which would obviously be deemed as guilty, and that would be crazy and things like that. What I want to ask you is, it seems as though federal authorities are using the tactic of crushing his character and making him guilty in the public before being guilty in the court of law. Is that a tactic that the feds typically use, and how beneficial is that? And do you think that's going on right now?
You can thank the current president of the United States for that. I just alluded to it. Eastland and Byrd came up 40 years ago with changes in the federal criminal laws that allowed that to happen. It's called these days lawfare. That's what they're talking about. Now, Diddy is presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. They have to put the trial on and they have to convict him. But what I'm looking at is an extra effort to totally discredit him. So if he is later in a position of being a whistleblower, his credibility will be completely destroyed, and public opinion can be steered in a direction where basically anything he says can be ignored or discredited. I think that's why it's looking like it does. As I look at it and read the indictments, it's nothing that I haven't run into before, representing a lot of pimps, prostitutes, and dancers. And it's just pimping and procuring. That's what they're talking about. And in this case, the purpose was to set up some freak parties, freak shows, orgies, where performances were being professionally put on in various places in a mansion while the rest of the folk could get their freak on. That's what you're looking at here.
Right. Now there's another aspect of it as well where they are accusing him of forcefully, making men and women do sexual acts that they did not want to do. Okay.
They wouldn't even say that. That's just adding a bit in there to make it look worse. Essentially, there are just 3 counts to this indictment, but instead of 2 pages, it's 14 because they add a lot of little stuff in there to make it look horrible to the typical person that is likely to get this, which most aren't. They just hear the news media talk about it.
Now, it's been a lot of discussion going on, and we can argue to our face turn blue whether or not Diddy is a good man or not. But we're talking about whether or not he has broken the law to the point where he needs to be put behind bars for a number of years, and that's where we're at right now. In your opinion,
that's not the important part.
Right.
That's well set up, the due process of law in the Bill of Rights and also in the 14th Amendment. He's got the right to due process, whether it's on a state level, which this is, federal level, which comes in under the Bill of Rights. What we're talking is, why is the U.S. government taking it upon itself to do what it's doing, where it becomes very obvious if you read between the lines, they're trying to protect somebody instead of prosecute them as co-actors in this mess, and why they're trying to do what they're doing to silence somebody who might expose who those protected people are. Keep the Epstein thing in mind. We know who was on the list of visitors to the island and who flew on the airplanes, because those things have been published. But this time, this close to this crucial November election, it strikes me that somebody does not want that to happen again.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but we kind of alluding to maybe former presidents or political people.
No, Trump has nothing to do with this one.
I was talking
This
also
is
about
Ro-
Obama, maybe.
No,
Okay.
this is Mrs. Imhoff is married to a big-time Hollywood lawyer. Prior to 2014, when she married him, this big-time Jewish Hollywood lawyer who has a lot of clients in the communications industry, they were all on Kamala Harris's behind about her little goings on. It stopped suddenly in 2014 when she married somebody who had a Hollywood inside. And you have to understand, who is this that's likely to be going to these parties, and who is it involved that it is an entertainer? Is there some kind of implication that would influence that person's campaign? And we already know what kind of freak she has already been. We look at Willie and Montel, and when she was in Howard, and some other things going on out there in California that are a bit wild. So this, remember, has been going on allegedly since 2009. Who is implicated in this? It's not Trump. This is brought to you by people who are very much against Trump and more likely to protect somebody else. I find it unprecedented that none of these witnesses are listed with the rest of the detail, which is not surprising in a federal case, since they try to obscure their witnesses. See, in a state case, every one of the 50 states, unless the prosecution can show the judge that some witness's life is in danger, they have to give the defense the list of witnesses, their contact information, and not only the ones they know about, the ones that they should have found out about in the exercise of what they call due diligence in an investigation. A state prosecution has to be transparent, but in the feds, they do it by ambush. So I'm particularly concerned about the input of all of these gory details in here, which are designed essentially to inflame the public.
Right. Could we? Yep.
I don't know, because it's going to depend upon the jury. But you see, now you've got a situation where subtly and perhaps allowably they've tainted any New York jury, because they've been showing these film clips. So whatever the jurors told, unless there's an exceptionally able jury selection, you're going to get people in the I saw what he did, and you can hear it on some of social media. We had an egg space, Dana and I, the real Dana and I, did last night, and there were some people that called in. They didn't care what the law was. He needed to go to jail because of the horrible things he did. But you see, that's not American law.
Right.
See a lot of that right now.
Yeah. if we can switch gears just a little bit to politics, I want to ask you about former President Trump. In your opinion, it's been, well, not opinion, but it's been 2 attempts on his life. Why do you think they are, or the individuals are trying to take Trump out? Is he anti-establishment, or is it just some nuts just trying to, do what they're trying to do to make a name for themselves?
Well, let's see. For the last 5 years, you have heard a constant stream of rhetoric from the Democratic Party, from their national committee all the way down to local level officials, about how evil Trump is. And Maxine Waters was going out talking about we have to, fight this and burn this down. And Kamala Harris was raising bond money for the people who got busted for burning down a lot of the black businesses over the George Floyd BLM stuff. And by the way, they weren't black people that were doing it. It was a bunch of little liberal white kids going out for the most part doing this. And you've got this steady egging on. You've got this steady rhetoric about it's okay. So, you say something long enough, tell a lie long enough, loud enough, you get anybody to believe it. You keep up with this psychological, okay, it's okay to do this. This is what you ought to do. The public has become inured to this, and you get the weak minds who will try to do it. Now, what has happened, I find unusual in one sense, because the handwriting has long been on the wall. Robert Kennedy got assassinated as a candidate for president. Mm-hmm. George Wallace, racist as he was, got paralyzed and put in a wheelchair when he was a presidential candidate. All right. You have other instances where candidates for president have been put in jeopardy. You've got a situation where this is the second time the same candidate for president has been put in a situation where assassination attempts were in progress. Mm-hmm. Now, what you hear is, well, he's not the president, so we aren't taking the precautions. Well, in the first instance, they drew down his standard Secret Service detail to go deal with Jill Biden having essentially a tea party, and they wanted extra security for that, or a cocktail, a tea party. And that's absolutely absurd. So what I'm looking at is, I don't think Secret Service or anybody over them is complicit in planning this with anybody, but they know, based on the rhetoric that's been out there for 5-6 years about this, there are likely to be crazies who will find it justified to do this. And what's going on is they're ignoring it and hoping that what is almost the inevitable will occur. And they can say, oh, it's a tragedy. We were remiss. We should have done something about it. Now, one thing that I am very disturbed about is both of these would-be assassins were featured in BlackRock commercials. Yep. How come? What is the connection? Is it sheer statistical coincidence, or is there something else? It's beginning to look a little weird. But if you want to get a clear explanation, go back 90 years. Go to Deutschland, Germany, and you see what the Nazi Party did. You find that Adolf, and in this case Goebbels, Joseph Goebbels, Nazi minister of propaganda, were talking about the danger of misinformation. So they set up effectively an anti-misinformation bureau. Waltz has been talking about free speech should be restricted because of the danger of misinformation. That's not how our system works, but that's what he's saying. And Kamala Harris is pontificating about she's going to set up a bureau of misinformation. the exact same thing the Nazis did 90 years ago in 1934. Also, we have Strength Through Joy, a specific program that Kamala is proposing. And we look back 90 years to Germany in 1934, and lo and behold, the specific program the Nazis set up, Strength Through Joy, with exactly the same structure and purpose. We look at the Second Amendment stuff where she lied during the debate where she said she's the gun owner and she's not going to do this. And yet on X for the last week, they've been playing clip after clip where she says, first thing, we're going to have expanded red flag laws. Okay, they already have them. And universal background checks, they already have them. And a mandatory buyback first thing of all semi-auto weapons, and a prohibition on buying assault rifles, which she's talking about semi-auto stuff that's 100 years old, because a real assault rifle is a machine gun, and those aren't exactly out there freely available, and et cetera, et cetera. She's lying about it. But when we look back 90 years to 1934 in Pomerania, Stuttgart, and let's see, two other of the German principalities, some crazies went off and shot up some of the open markets. So they had Bavaria. They had some draconian gun control laws put in place to disarm the German public, except Nazi party members. And a series of things that you can see duplicated almost word for word in the conceptualization of how they were presented to the German public that you're seeing right now. So it looks kind of a little scary, like why are we having this Nazism come back, not on behalf of Trump, but on the other side, and they're engaged in what, when I was studying it, I think it would have been Propaganda 172B at UCLA. We had those courses back then. That would be what we now call flipping the script. The clues accuse the other side of what you're doing. So what is this? Why do we have mainstream media instead of saying there is a contention on one side, such and such? It says one side lying, as they have always done, falsely says such and such. That's not news. That's editorialization. So things are beginning to click in place, and what do we have? I would put it to you that why politics looks so crazy right now is because it's not really politics. Now, I'm not getting on gay folk. I guess they can get their freak on in their bedroom all they want to. That's legal. But what I am talking about is this LGBTQIA thing is being used to set up a cult, a philosophical cult that is being pushed as the official faith or religion of the United States these days, and they're trying to spread it around the world. To understand it in context, it's like Buddhism. Buddhism has no God. You can have one, but you don't have to be a Buddhist. And there's no designated one. So what we have with the rainbow cult is it's godless, or you can have one or not, but it's a philosophy. And the philosophy is anti-masculinity and also anti-character. No guilt, no shame are the primary precepts of this particular philosophy. Do anything you want to. You owe no one anything at all. You don't have to be courageous or brave. You don't have any duty. You have no honor. You have no obligation. of making where you live a better, safer, more secure place filled with economic prosperity, sense of purpose. Nothing. You're supposed to be taken care of from cradle to grave. There's supposed to be no competition. There's participation ribbons. Everybody's to be protected, but Big Brother, I guess Big Sister now that they trannied out, is supposed to protect you, but nobody's supposed to protect you from it because you are going to be oppressed. And I remember a professor I had in 1967. She said America is in grave danger of becoming a fascist nation. Not because of some jackboot wearing, goose stepping uniform thugs, but because of, as she put it, some pink panty wearing, long haired beatniks who would quickly impose the worst elements of fascism on your republic because they're scared, they want to be protected, and they want to protect you from being everything that you considered normal, dignified, and stuff that showed good character. And that's basically what you're looking at right now, 50 some years later, 55 years later.
I want to talk about the dynamic because there's been pandering in politics since the beginning of time, but within the last 8 years, we've seen it more than ever. In particular, there's been like a line drawn within black people as if you vote one way, you're not black, and if you don't vote for this, you're not black. And we've seen celebrities, and we don't got to name the celebrities, we know who they are. They get on their social media platforms every day and talk about you don't like black women if you don't like Kamala Harris. You're a coon if you like Donald Trump. They seem to be trying to manipulate black people to choose one side without hearing any type of policy, without hearing anything that's going to happen for them. But if they don't choose this side, their black identity is now in question. Can you talk about that dynamic that we've seen in particular last 8 years?
50 some years ago, I was working as an intern for a Washington, D.C. think tank. It was called the Center for National Policy Review, and it operated out of Catholic University. We were reviewing the causality for the then current situation in America relative to black power and such, and what black power was going against. Now, one of the things I did is for quite a few weeks, I was up late at night in the Library of Congress looking at the microfilm copies of the slave pamphlets. That's what we call them. They were pamphlets that were sold, basically how to raise slaves for fun and profit. That would be an infomercial late night on cable now. And one of the things they said that was most effective is put the elements of slavery in the slave's culture. So the slave mothers raised their children to be ideal slaves. They would domesticate them for you. The Democratic Party was founded in the beginning of the second decade of the 19th century, way back in the early 1800s, for the specific purpose of protecting and spreading slavery. They caused the Civil War. They started it. They set up Jim Crow, segregation, and resistance to ending segregation. They were the party of the slave owners. They were the guys that came up with put the elements of slavery into slaves' culture so they will make slaves of themselves. And there really was a Willie Lynch, but it wasn't a letter. He wrote a series of pamphlets starting from 1706, I think, was the first one published that I read on microfilm, up to 1728. He lived in Bermuda and he raised slaves, and he would tour the English colonies of North America and the Caribbean and get paid pretty good sums for the time for giving lectures on how to raise slaves for fun and profit. And what the Democratic Party is essentially done with what you're talking about, young sir, is evoke these things they put in the black culture 180, 190, 200 years ago to make them produce ideal slaves for their plantations. They are evoking those things to bring the slave back out of himself. The descendants of slaves are making themselves slaves. They live on a mental plantation that the Democratic Party puts out. And the party of the old slave masters has become looked at as the salvation for this type of black. Politics throughout this country's history, throughout the English historical context before that, has always been a matter of not absolute loyalty by any one group to a party, but a bounce around of who's going to do most in return for my support given by a vote to them. But unfortunately, black folk think they're owned by the Democratic Party. And you're in a situation where no matter what the Democratic Party does not do for the black constituents they have, they'll still get their votes. So they have no incentive to change or do anything for the black voters. They are guaranteed the black vote. The Republican Party, on the other hand, has been the subject of negative propaganda for the last 60-some years. So no matter what the Republican Party does to try to reach out, they won't get any response. So you're stuck with the stupid position that you put yourself in where neither political party has an incentive to do a damn thing for you.
Right.
That's a dead-end game. And if you look at every other ethnic group in this country, I don't care what they are, sometimes they vote Democratic as a bloc, sometimes they vote Republican. And every now and then, just so one party gets thrown off, they say, oh, screw you, we're going to vote for the other side just to show you what it feels like when your well runs dry and you don't have your water, meaning us. We don't do that. And we've got some people that never were part of the militant movement that took over from civil rights in the mid-'60s that really advanced things. We had some little cowards who snuck in behind what other people who had a lot more balls going for them did. And now they are creatures of the Democratic Party, and they're trying to impose a situation where the black family is destroyed, black masculinity is suppressed, if not destroyed, and they're reinstating the same party setup they had, not party, but setup they had on the plantations, where you always had your mammies running the Negroes, not black men. I can remember pamphlet after pamphlet, 1843, 1856. It says, whatever you do, gentlemen, even if he is your favorite gun bearer or your valet or your favorite companion that you've known for life, never interact with your Negroes through a man. Always pick a slave woman to be the interacting party. Pick comely bed wenches and entertain your guests so you can find out what they're up to for economic advantage. If they prove of use, promote them until when they start getting gray in the hair, make mammies of them and have them in charge of the Negroes on your plantation. And that's just exactly what you're looking at. And we are getting stuff that is absolutely insulting. Look at the one for 2020. Take your booties to the poll. Now, why in the hell would a black man be presumed stupid enough to look at some naked behind as a reason to go vote for somebody? And by the way, it was Valerie. We do a thing on Friday. We interviewed the woman that put it on, and it turned out when we looked up the people that she had hired to do this, 1/3 of them weren't even girls. They were trannies. So black men are supposed to look at bare behind and go vote for somebody. And if you noticed how you see all the time some kind of swishy flaming guys out there, they're doing line dances out in front of something like that's supposed to be an incentive to go vote, not how much you're making on your job, not what your taxes are, not what your medical benefits are, not what a whole lot of things are, not what the military posture of the country is. And a lot of our folk are in the military. We don't look at that. We're supposed to watch a bunch of fools be monkeys on a little silver chain and dancing and singing. And Kamala's always dancing. And then look, did you see that mess a few weeks ago where that fool was talking about everybody knows we're entitled to 20 acres and a mule? You damn fool, everybody black for the last 150 years. Everybody else in this country knows it's 40 damn acres. Mm-hmm. That's more BS. Like, I cook my greens, I clean my greens in the bathtub. In the dorms where everybody's been washing their nasty ass up in the, you're gonna fix your greens up in a bathtub in a dorm. Your mama would beat the crap out of you. Mm-hmm. Or excuse me, I was in the dorm smoking and I inhaled. And I was listening to Tupac. When that heifer was in the dorms, Tupac was 10 years old. When he released his first single, he was 21 and she was a prosecutor in the Alameda County District Attorney's Office. Lying heifer, are you smoking dope when you prosecuting for dope? Or are you in the dorms when you're supposed to be out of law school? Do we believe this crap? And I talked to her daddy. I sat next to, my ex-wife sat next to her dad for 2.5 hours at a banquet that the Governor General of Jamaica had invited us to, and we talked to him. He said he had no black ancestors. He had some dark-skinned Hindus for grandmothers, and he had some white ancestors that owned a lot of slaves. Brownstown in Jamaica, they named it after this slave owner who had 4,000 some odd slaves. So Kamala's got slave owners in her background, not through any slaves, but from the white side. So how the hell does she become black? And even if she is, guess what? Her parents weren't trying to be long-term visitors. They were just on temporary visiting status with academic visas that weren't long-term. They had no intent to be citizens. They just came through here. They met up in Berkeley area at a university campus. They got together and nature took its course. They had one baby born 1964 where my late former mother-in-law was a pediatrics nurse, and where my ex-wife was born during the same 12-month period, and then they had another kid in 67. Moms got on up out of there not long after that, the relationship that is, and when Kamala was no older than 12, and it looks like, depending upon how you read her yearbook, a lot younger than that, up in Canada where mama had a job in oncology, meaning cancer research, and dad was temporarily down there at Berkeley where he left, and he was there when I was going back and forth up to Berkeley's campus from UCLA. Remember, I'm basically just about 3-4 years younger than him. So he was a grad student and I was an undergrad, and he was pushing communist stuff in socialism, teaching economics up there for a brief while, getting his doctorate degree. And what is this chick's connection to America? She doesn't have a parent who's an American resident or citizen. She certainly doesn't have any grandparents. She's got Hindu in her background and Irish in her background, and she got raised in Canada. And if you want to get the difference between Canadians and Americans, look at that adult cartoon South Park where they keep ridiculing it, and you'll get the idea. Canadians are not citizens, they're subjects. They belong to the King of England. And it's part of the British Commonwealth. even if she came and had black in her, she would have been from St. Elizabeth Parish, where they had bright and white in Jamaica. And I've been to Jamaica an awful lot. And you hear somebody speaking patois, turn around and there's a Chinaman. And when you talk to him, his parents are from Hong Kong, part of the British Empire, part of the British Commonwealth before the communists got it. Okay, so you talk to somebody, where are they from? They're from Kenya. Where is this one from? Pakistan. Where is this one from? India, the Commonwealth. Where is this one from? This guy is in security for Jamaica, and he's from Australia. My ex used to be a fine thing, movie star. She'd always have a lot of bling when we traveled, and I can remember several times somebody looked like James Bond wanted to know, did she have a passport? Yes. And I said, excuse me, that's my wife. We're American citizens. And they'd apologize. They thought she was a highbright trying to get out of Jamaica. I had to write a series of letters for the chauffeur for the prime minister. He was in his 60s and he wanted to visit his son who was going to school in America. And he couldn't because Jamaicans can't freely leave Jamaica when they want to, like you can here. You have to get permission from the government. See, that's the kind of background, and that's what we've got here. We got faked out on. Oh, she's an AKA. She does that ski-wee thing, so that's supposed to make her black. And she's the first black Greek who is vice president of the United States and candidate for U.S. president. That's a damn lie. The Alpha 85A has that distinction because Hubert Humphrey, a 6'4" tall white boy, badly balding with blonde hair, blue eyes, was made in the late 1930s up in Minnesota, and I hear he got a lot of wood applied to his behind, and he made the grad chapter in the 40s, and in the mid-1960s, they made him an honorary life member, which in this case, you are automatically a life member, but in honorary status, you don't have to pay any dues to maintain your status. So AFIA had a black vice president. No, they had a white one, just like Kamala, who is, guess what? You know what they classify her type of Hindu being? The technical definition is Indo-Aryan. She's an Aryan, just like the ones that Hitler was talking about, but he told a lie long and loud enough, and Aryans are not blonde-haired, blue-eyed from the far north. They're from West Asia, India, and they're swarthy, dark-eyed, dark-haired, just like Kamala and her daddy and her mama. They're Aryans mixed with Irish. So you got an Aryan talking about Nazification. Ain't that a bitch?
Full circle. And with that said,
And the Negroes just love it.
Yep.
Oh, it's one of us.
you're gonna upset Plies, Judge. Don't get Plies upset, Judge.
Why not? I don't give a damn. I always had a philosophy. Yea, though I walked through the alley in the shadow of death, I feared no evil, because I'm the baddest MF up in this valley. Now check me out and see if I can't get my John Wick on. Come on, make my damn day. I have a lot of frustration and aggression to display. Do something.
That's right.
And by the way, see, I'll say this. I don't like this punk play I'm looking at with all these Negro slave niggers running around in the Democratic Party. See, I didn't just have this TV judgeship for 15 years. I did real world. I recruited John Huggins and Bunchy Carter to UCLA. Those were Panthers. I recruited Geronimo Pratt, Panther. I recruited Elaine Brown, Panther. Nathaniel Clark, Gwen Goodlow to UCLA. I know about that. I was UCLA's BSU's community liaison when we were all working with Black Student Alliance, and we were patrolling armed South Central to keep the crap down from the thugs and LAPD getting out of hand. See, I did that. These folk didn't. I participated in many a thing with these clowns up in the Bay Area at the same time that Kamala was a little girl up there when we were trying to tell the Bay Area chapters of the Panther Party, man, don't walk off in this damn thing with them guns trying to grandstand and raise money. We are patrolling the community, man, and everybody's armed. And if you armed in California right now, long guns is legal to have a loaded carbine or 12-gauge shotgun.
Mm-hmm.
If open, you do that, they did it anyway. 2 weeks later, Ronald Reagan signed the bill. It was illegal. And then black folk who were patrolling their community started getting killed in shootouts with the police. See, I remember that. They weren't there. I know what we did to open stuff up when they had these punks that wouldn't even go. Pissed their pants scared if you tried to drag them there.
Mm.
And now they're going for bail. I'm a judge, okay? I was the last one on the James Earl Ray case. I'll tell you, J. Edgar Hoover set it up. The FBI recruited 2 hitmen from the Marine Corps Sniper School in Quantico, Virginia, right across the tarmac from the FBI Academy there, training facility there. They got supplied with the murder weapon, an M21 by the FBI. The FBI supplied the ammunition. They set the damn thing up and covered it in the Memphis Police Department's homicide squad for the last 60 years. They said James Earl Ray wasn't the one. He wasn't. He wasn't even in Memphis. And I know what went on, but you know, that's dangerous. So you know what they did with yours truly? 5 people broke into my house at 3:30 in the morning. We had a damn shootout.
Mm.
And these punk fools ain't been anywhere near other than farting distance to any other thing that's unpleasant. Because they're plantation Negroes. And they've been bought with a little extra corn pone and more fried chicken like that pulpit pimp who doesn't even have a pulpit, with that bobble head running around talking nonsense. And remember, Tawana Brawley, when he sat there and he backed that lie that she wound up making about getting raped by these white boys that turned out not to be true. All right, all of the crap going on. James Brown's buddy, that's why he conked his hair when everybody else that was doing that was on a mannequin in the Smithsonian Institution's early modern history wing. Yeah, that chump. And popping fresh Doughboy, Pillsbury Doughboy with chocolate chips, Roland Martin with his bought off ass.
Talk to
I'll
him.
call him out.
Yes, sir.
See, you can't. I know what you have to do. I don't have that much longer to live in life. I'm in good health, but damn it, I ain't backing down off of this struggle. And black folk need to say, hell no. You've been trying to destroy black manhood for 50 years. And they try to, this feminist nonsense these clowns are pushing is trying to destroy manhood in the whole country. But they look at us as the most masculine element of American manhood, that is the black man. So they want to take us down, make an example of it, and everything else becomes easy. Back in the mid-60s, there was a coalition. This is how it started. You had females who hated that they weren't men. Those were the feminists. You had the females, some of them, who hated men. Those were the lesbians. You had the weak boys that hated that they weren't strong men, beta boys, soy boys, whatever you want to call them. You had some gay guys who hated that they weren't normal men. And you had folk who hated men because war was supposed to be a man thing, and there was the norm over there, and people were getting drafted left and right. and they didn't like it. So they came together in a coalition to destroy manhood. Words a man thing, man. You know, we got to take down manhood, man. We got to be about love so we don't have war. And then they started having unisex child clothing, unisex child hairstyles, unisex child rearing, boys playing with dolls, no war toys, no cap guns, water pistols, or anything like that. And you got this hellacious mess that came in when Hollywood was having a horrible problem. Color television, up until the mid-1960s, used to be little bitty round things that were kind of freak shows. Nobody looked at them, but then they started making them practical, so they got bigger. And then color TV was causing Hollywood movie studios to lose a lot of money. In 1967, if you were an adult, you paid 50 cents and you could walk into a movie anytime you chose in the middle of a feature, sit through what was being shown. Then you could look at the 3 sub-features, the 2 or 3 cartoons, the second full-length movie, and then sit through that one and sit through the part of the movie you missed, or sit through the whole thing, or sit there all night and leave. And every Thursday, you got 2 new movies at every theater in the country, and every Sunday you did 2, no matter how